My daughter looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're not welcome at my wedding unless you sign the house over to us." I blinked, thinking I'd misheard, but she just stood there, in her white dress, her lips tight, her fiancé watching smugly from the corner of the room. I paid for the venue. I built the house she wants. I buried her mother in the backyard garden. And now I was being told I didn't belong. I nodded slowly, left the room, and shut the door behind me. But I wasn't done yet. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below, and don't forget to press the subscribe button. After I left the bridal shop that day, I drove around for hours. I didn't even know where I was going. Just me and the road, quiet except for the rattling of old tools in the back of the truck, tools I once used to build her swing set. She was 5 when I built that swing. Pink pigtails, scraped knees, and the brightest laugh I've ever heard. "Higher, Daddy! Higher!" she'd shout, like the sky owed her something. Back then, I'd have given her the whole sky if I could. Her mother, Marjorie, passed when she was just 7. Cancer. Quick and cruel. One day we were planning a vacation, the next we were planning a funeral. The day I told my daughter her mommy was gone, she didn't cry. Not at first. She just climbed into my lap and fell asleep, like she was hoping to wake up and find it wasn't true. From that moment on, it was just the two of us, me and her, my world. I worked every hour I could, construction during the day, odd jobs on weekends, fixing anything folks in town needed. I didn't take vacations, didn't date, didn't even buy new shoes until mine were nearly falling apart. Every extra dollar went to her future. Piano lessons, new school uniforms, art supplies she'd use once and forget in the closet. People used to call us the quiet team. She didn't talk much around others, but with me she'd chatter endlessly. I knew her dreams, to be a writer, to travel the world, to live in a big city. I knew which stuffed animal she couldn't sleep without, which nightlight kept away her fears. On the nights I came home late, she'd leave notes for me on the kitchen table, crayon scribbles that said, "I love you, Daddy," or "Don't work too hard." I kept them all. Still have a box in the attic labeled Grace's Notes. She named the house Marjorie's Place. We built it together, or at least, she thought she did. She'd hand me nails and hold the tape measure like it was a magic wand. Every room was filled with memory. Her tiny handprint in the concrete by the porch, her height marks on the pantry door frame, the corner of her bedroom wall where she secretly wrote "Grace Ply Daddy Bear Forever" in glitter pen. I thought we were solid. I thought she'd grown into a kind woman. She studied hard, got a scholarship, made it through college. I was proud, showed her graduation photo to anyone who'd listen, even strangers at the gas station. But something shifted after she moved out. It started with shorter phone calls, missed birthdays. Then came the carefully worded conversations. "You should think about retirement, Dad," and "That old house must be so much work for you." I didn't catch it at the time. I thought she was just busy. I thought she was still my Grace. Now I wonder when she stopped seeing me as her father and started seeing me as something in the way. She met him at work. Ryan, real estate guy, slick smile, expensive watch, soft hands. First time I shook his hand, I knew. Something about him felt hollow, like he shook your hand while measuring the square footage behind your back. When they got engaged, I was happy for her. Honestly, I was. I even offered to pay for the wedding, not because I had to, but because I wanted her to have something beautiful, something her mother would have wanted. Grace said thank you, but I noticed how she didn't hug me like she used to. She didn't hold on. I didn't ask for much. Just a small part in the ceremony, a reading, maybe a walk down the aisle. But the deeper we got into the planning, the more I realized I was being pushed out. The wedding became a show. For his family, his friends, his status. I was just the wallet with the hammer. But still, I told myself, she's just stressed. She'll come around. I believed it right up until she looked me in the eye and gave me that ultimatum. Now, I sit here in this truck, parked in the driveway of the house I built. Her childhood bedroom still has the wallpaper she picked out at 10 years old. Stars and moons. I offered to update it once, and she said, "No, it's perfect." I close my eyes and I can still hear her. It's perfect. Back then, she knew what mattered. Love, safety, home. Now? Now she wants it all on paper, signed over, mine to hers, like a transaction. She told me I was only invited to the wedding if I gave her the house. But what she doesn't know, what no one knows, is that house isn't just wood and nails. It's a story. And I haven't finished writing it yet. The first time I truly felt it, that chill behind my daughter's smile, was the night they announced the engagement. They hosted dinner at some rooftop restaurant in the city, one of those places where water costs $10 and nobody looks you in the eye unless you're holding a credit card. Ryan pulled out my chair like it was a performance. Grace barely touched her food. And when the waitress brought champagne, she didn't toast to love or family. She toasted to new beginnings. I should have known then. I wasn't part of the new beginning. After dessert, Ryan slid a folder across the table. "Preliminary housing plans," he said, like we were at a business meeting. "We're looking to consolidate family assets. Multi-generational wealth is built on strategic decisions." I blinked. "I'm sorry?" Grace placed a hand on mine. It was cold. "He just means we should start thinking practically, Dad. The house is big. You're alone." I forced a smile. "You think I should move out?" "Not now," she said quickly. "Just eventually, before things get hard." I stared at her. That was the first time I realized she was planning my decline like it was an investment timeline. And Ryan? He just looked satisfied, like he'd been waiting for that moment to land. Over the next few weeks, it got worse. They stopped visiting the house altogether, claimed they were so busy with wedding prep. But I saw them, driving by slowly in his black SUV, parking across the street, pointing at the porch. Once, I stepped outside and they sped off like teenagers caught sneaking around. Then came the whispers. At church, Mrs. Langley said, "Grace told me you're selling the house. Oh, how exciting." I didn't know what to say, because I wasn't. At the grocery store, Mr. Patel, the pharmacist, asked if I needed help finding assisted living brochures. "Grace said you might want something quieter," he said gently. Quiet. They were already rehearsing my removal in public. The final straw was the engagement party. It was held at a winery, the kind with fairy lights and a jazz trio playing in the background. I wore my best suit, polished my shoes, brought a photo of Marjorie to place on the table because she deserved to be part of the moment. But when I arrived, there was no seat for me. They had assigned seating, rows of tables with printed names, her fiancé's family all bunched together, laughing like they owned the place. I found my name tucked at a table in the corner, next to the valet and the caterer's father. I sat there for 20 minutes before I realized Grace hadn't even looked for me. When she finally walked by, I stood up. "Sweetheart, do you have a moment?" She glanced at Ryan, then turned to me with that same plastic smile. "Dad, this isn't really a good time." I held out the framed photo of her mother. "I thought maybe we could keep her at the head table, just for tonight." Her face tightened. "That's not really the aesthetic we're going for." I don't know what stung more, the words or how easily she said them. I nodded, stepped back, and left without finishing my drink. Back home, I sat in Marjorie's rocking chair and stared at the photo. Grace was 6 in it, sitting on her mother's lap, eating strawberries from the garden. We were happy. We were whole. Now I couldn't even recognize her voice. The next morning I found a voicemail. Grace, trying to sound cheerful. "Hey Dad, sorry about last night. Things were just hectic. Hope you understand. Ryan's mom says hi. Oh, also, we're meeting with a financial planner next week. Maybe you could send over any paperwork about the house. Just for review. Just for review." I didn't call back. Instead, I walked through the house slowly, touching the walls she once decorated with finger paint and dreams. Her old bedroom still had glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. I never had the heart to peel them off. Now I wondered if she would, the minute she got the deed. That's when I began to notice something else. It wasn't just Grace pulling away. It was Ryan moving in. Not into the house, but into the space between us. He was taking over family conversations, making decisions, talking about the property instead of Dad's home. It felt like death by inches. One night, I found a letter from the wedding venue, addressed to me, accidentally delivered here. It was a payment receipt for catering, chairs, lighting, paid in full by me. Yet no one asked me to help plan anything. No one asked me what food I liked, if I had a +1, or even if I'd be sitting with family. It was all decided. I was paying for a show I wasn't part of. That week I stopped answering their calls. Grace left voicemails, always short, always distracted. Ryan never called, just emails with subject lines like, "Follow up on estate discussion." They stopped calling me Dad. Now I was him, in the background, an old man in the way. And that's when I stopped waiting for them to come around. The rehearsal dinner was supposed to be a celebration. That's what the invitation said. An evening of gratitude, laughter, and family. Family. I showed up in the same blazer I wore to Grace's high school graduation. Marjorie picked it out years ago, gray with a soft navy trim. Still fit, though the sleeves tugged a little at the elbows. I brought a small wrapped box, too, a gift for Grace. Nothing fancy, just an old locket of her mother's, cleaned and polished, with a photo inside. Grace at age 3 sitting on Marjorie's shoulders in the spring garden. I waited near the parking lot when I arrived, watched everyone pull up in sleek cars, dressed like movie stars. Ryan's father wore a watch that probably cost more than my truck. The laughter spilled out before the guests even reached the venue doors. When I walked in, no one greeted me. The hostess looked confused. She checked her tablet. "Oh, Mr. Weaver, you're, at table 9. 9. I walked past clusters of smiling people, couples clinking glasses. I searched the room. The head table was a long stretch of white linen and gold chairs, Grace and Ryan's names in calligraphy at the center. Ryan's family filled most of the seats. So did his college friends. Grace's old schoolmates sat near the front. Her cousins. Even the photographer had a better seat. I found table 9 tucked near the back, right next to the kitchen doors. The tablecloth was a different shade of white. The chair wobbled. No one else sat there. I waited for a while, sipped water, tried not to draw attention. But I felt it, that growing burn behind my ribs. I wasn't just overlooked. I was placed deliberately, out of the way. 20 minutes passed before I saw her. Grace, in a silver dress that shimmered under the chandeliers. She looked beautiful, radiant even. For a second my heart lifted. That was still my little girl, somewhere in there. She laughed at something Ryan whispered. He kissed her cheek. I stood, walked slowly toward the head table. She saw me halfway there. Her expression faltered. "Dad," she said, but not like she meant it. "I just wanted to give you something," I said softly, offering the box. "It belonged to your mom." She glanced at Ryan, then back at me. Her voice lowered. "Now's not really the time. It'll only take a moment." She took the box, opened it halfway, and peeked inside. Her fingers curled around the locket, then hesitated. She looked back at Ryan's mother, a woman with sharp eyes and a tighter mouth. The woman was watching us like a hawk. Grace smiled, brittle. "Thanks, Dad. I'll look at it later." I stood there a moment longer. "You know, she would have wanted to be here tonight. Your mom." Grace didn't respond. Ryan slid in. "Hey, Mr. Weaver, we're actually going to need your seat for one of our videographers. Hope you don't mind." I blinked. "My seat?" "Yeah," he said, too cheerfully. "Just logistical stuff. You understand. It's all a bit tight." I looked back at table 9, empty, forgotten. Then at the head table, 20 people deep, none of them me, and finally at my daughter. She didn't say a word, didn't argue, didn't even flinch. I nodded slowly. Of course, wouldn't want to get in the way. I walked past the bathroom, down a quiet hall, and stepped outside. The night was warm. Crickets chirped near the hedges. Inside, I could hear a burst of laughter, a toast, glasses clinking. I sat on a bench and opened the small card I had tucked in the box. It read, "Your mother always believed you'd do great things. So do I." I folded it back, slid it into my coat pocket, and stared at the dark sky. A few minutes later, the door creaked behind me. I didn't turn around. It was one of the servers, a young man, maybe 20, nervous. "Sir, I'm supposed to ask if you'll move your car. It's blocking the shuttle turnaround." Of course it was. I drove home in silence, left the locket on the passenger seat. Didn't bother turning on the lights when I got back. Just walked room to room in the dark, touching the walls with my fingertips. Every board in that house I had nailed in place. Every creak in the floor told a story. I used to fix them. Now I let them sing. In the kitchen, I stood by the window and looked out at the backyard. Marjorie's roses were in full bloom. I planted them the year after she died. They never failed to bloom, even when the world felt like it had forgotten me. That night, something inside me changed. It wasn't just about the seat at a table. It wasn't even about the house. It was about dignity, legacy, being treated like a man who mattered, not a liability in a nice suit. They weren't just forgetting me. They were erasing me, and I wasn't going to let them. It was a Wednesday when I overheard them. I hadn't planned to be at the cafe that day. My truck had a flat, and I stopped at Jackson's garage across the street. While they patched the tire, I walked over to May's Diner, a quiet little place with chipped booths and good coffee. I just sat down when I heard my daughter's voice, Grace. She was sitting 2 tables behind me, half hidden by a potted plant. She didn't see me. Her back was to the door. Ryan was with her, along with a woman in a gray blazer and thick glasses. Lawyer, I guessed. I froze. Ryan spoke first. "We just need to make sure it's airtight. He's old school. Everything's in his name, but we've got access to some of the documents." The woman nodded. "If he signs voluntarily, it's simple. If not, you'll need medical proof. Early dementia, perhaps. That opens up the power of attorney route." Grace didn't say anything at first, then softly, "He's not sick. He's just stubborn." Ryan leaned forward. "You said he's been forgetful lately." She hesitated. "He repeats stories, but he always has. He's not incompetent." The lawyer scribbled something. "Well, either way. If you want access to the estate post-wedding, it's better to act now. Once there's a surviving spouse, you'd have to go through probate." "His wife's dead," Ryan said quickly. "Has been for years." That's when Grace spoke again. "He'll leave it to me, eventually. He promised, when I was little." "Promises aren't legal," the lawyer said, not unkindly. "Signatures are." They laughed. I didn't move, didn't breathe. My coffee sat untouched. I felt like a man listening to his own eulogy, delivered over lattes. Eventually they stood and left. I waited another 10 minutes before I got up. I walked out like nothing had happened, nodded at the waitress, smiled even. But inside, I was dying. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and pulled out the fireproof box from the pantry. Inside, my will, the deed to the house, insurance papers, Marjorie's letters, and every tax return since 1984. I laid them out in front of me, one by one. Grace's name was listed as my sole beneficiary. It had been that way since she turned 21. I never questioned it, never thought I'd need to. But now I saw every dotted line through a different lens, not as security, not as love, but as motive. I thought of Marjorie, her laugh, her way of making pancakes in the shape of stars. I remembered her last request just before she passed. Promise me you'll protect Grace and this home, no matter what. I had. I'd done everything I could. But now, protecting Grace and protecting the home felt like two separate things, and I had to choose. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my armchair, listening to the wind brush the windows. I started watching more closely after that. At church, Grace stopped sitting beside me. She sat 2 rows up, with Ryan's parents. She used to slip her arm through mine during hymns. Now, her hands stayed folded in her lap. At the next planning meeting for the wedding, one I wasn't even supposed to attend but showed up for anyway, I noticed how they flinched when I mentioned the house. It's been in my name for 35 years, I said casually. Never had a mortgage since Marjorie passed. Ryan's jaw clenched. Grace changed the subject. They were worried. That confirmed it. One afternoon, while organizing old family photos in the attic, I found a letter. From Grace, dated 2003. She must have been 11 or 12. Dear Daddy, when I grow up, I want to live here forever. I'll take care of the garden and you can sit on the porch with Mommy's blanket. I'll bring you tea and you'll tell me stories. I held it to my chest. Somewhere, that little girl still existed. But the woman she'd become, she was building something, a scheme, a future, that didn't include me. Not really, just my assets, my name on a deed. She wasn't alone either. Ryan, his parents, even that lawyer, they saw me as a speed bump, a legal hurdle, and for the first time in my life, I felt unsafe, not in my neighborhood, not in my body, but in my own bloodline. I had to act, not with rage, not with revenge, but with clarity. That's when I began taking notes. Every conversation, every message. I started recording phone calls, quietly, carefully. I called an old friend, Walter, retired attorney. He once helped me with a property line dispute. He agreed to meet. We sat on the back porch as the sun dipped low. I poured us lemonade and we went over everything. He read in silence, then finally looked up. Do you want them to get anything? I didn't answer right away. Finally, I said, I want the truth to matter. He nodded. Then we got to work. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. I asked her to come by the house, just her, no Ryan, no planner, no excuses. Dinner, I said simply. Just like old times. She hesitated on the phone. Ryan and I have a tasting that night. I won't ask again, Grace. There was a pause. Then she sighed. Okay, I'll come by. I spent the afternoon making her favorite, baked chicken with rosemary, the way Marjorie used to do it. I even dug out the old linen napkins Grace embroidered in Girl Scouts. Her stitching was crooked, but I'd kept them all these years. When she arrived, she barely looked around. No hug, just a distracted glance at her phone. Nice to see you too, I said. She smiled, the same rehearsed smile I'd seen too often lately. Sorry, long day, wedding stuff. We sat, ate in silence. Halfway through, I asked, do you remember when you got that locket for Christmas, the one you wore for years? She nodded slowly. The silver one. From Mom. You know, it's strange, I said, setting my fork down. You wore it every day, but lately I don't see it anymore. Her eyes narrowed. Dad, what are you getting at? I took a deep breath. I overheard you. At May's diner. You, Ryan, and your lawyer. Her face went pale. That's what? You were spying on me? No, I said quietly. I was having coffee. You were talking loudly. She pushed her plate away. You're twisting things. I heard everything, I replied. Power of attorney, dementia, signatures, inheritance. She stood up. You have no idea what we're dealing with. Ryan and I are trying to build a future. You live in a house that's too big for you. You spend your days watering roses and talking to ghosts. I stayed seated, let her rant. You don't answer your phone half the time, she went on. You forget things. You repeat stories. Because I'm 71, I said calmly. Not because I'm losing my mind. Her shoulders dropped. You don't understand, Dad. This isn't personal. I looked up at her then, really looked. Not personal, I said. You tried to erase me from my own life. You pushed me to the back of your wedding, laughed behind my back, and now you want to take the last thing your mother and I built together. And you say it's not personal? She opened her mouth, but no words came. I stood and walked to the hallway, pulled out a folder, set it on the table. I've rewritten the will, I said. You're no longer the beneficiary. She froze. What? I've left the house to a children's charity, one your mother used to support. If anyone contests it, the clause triggers, and the entire estate goes to the state. Her lip quivered. You wouldn't. I did. She sank into the chair. So that's it? You're cutting me out completely? I'm cutting out lies, I said, not love. You made the choice, Grace, not me. We sat in silence. For a moment her eyes softened, like the child I once knew was still in there, buried under ambition and pressure and whatever Ryan had poured into her ears. But then the wall came back up. You're going to regret this, she said. No, I replied, standing. I regret letting it get this far. She left without taking her coat. That night I didn't cry, not like before. Instead, I wrote Marjorie a letter. I did what you would have done. I protected the house. I protected the story. Over the next few days, I started noticing things. The neighbors, the ones who had waved politely before, now lingered longer when they saw me. Mrs. Kent from down the road brought me a pie, said she'd heard whispers from the rehearsal. Grace has changed, she said, not unkindly. Even the mailman mentioned it. Shame what families do over property. Saw it with my sister. It seemed the town was watching. I wasn't hiding anymore. I told people the truth when they asked, calmly, without bitterness. I was an old man who'd built a life, and I refused to be bullied out of it. The turning point came when I saw Ryan at the hardware store. He didn't notice me at first. He was buying stain, probably for the porch on whatever house he thought he'd inherit. I walked up to him, slow and steady. Nice day, I said. He turned, startled, forced a smile. Mr. Weaver. I heard you're telling folks I'm unwell, I said plainly. His eyes darted. That's not, we're just concerned. I held up a hand. No need to explain. Just wanted you to know something. He waited. If you keep pushing, I said, you're going to find out how stubborn an old man can be, and how sharp his memory really is. Then I left him there, standing with his can of stain and nothing else to say. I didn't raise my voice, didn't make a scene, but for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. Not the fear of me, the fear of truth. The lawyer's office smelled like paper and lemon oil. Walter still used the same wooden desk he'd had when we were young men. Same brass lamp, same faded photo of his late wife on the shelf behind him. We'd both lost our loves too soon. That's what brought us close again, I think. That quiet understanding of grief's long shadow. He adjusted his glasses and looked at me. You sure about this? I nodded. It's not out of spite, it's protection. We sat in silence a while longer before he picked up his pen. All right, let's get started. He drew up a fresh will, clear, unambiguous, binding. The house, my house, the one I built nail by nail with Marjorie, would go to a local nonprofit that supported abandoned children. Grace used to volunteer there when she was a teenager, before everything changed, before she became someone I hardly recognized. If anyone contested the will, anyone, the clause was clear. All assets would go to a state-administered charity, one Grace had no ties to. No room for negotiation, no court fights, no half measures. I watched as Walter wrote, each line like a quiet brick in a wall I never thought I'd need. Do you want to include a letter? He asked. I paused, then nodded. Just a short one. He handed me a pen and a sheet of stationery. I stared at the blank page for a long time before writing. Grace, I loved you before you had a name. I loved you when you were nothing but a heartbeat beneath your mother's ribs. And I still love you now. But love is not a blank check. It's not something to be spent, forgotten, or twisted. I built this house for family. You chose something else. I hope someday you find peace. Dad. Walter folded the letter, sealed it in the envelope marked to be delivered only upon my death, and added it to the file. It was done. I should have felt relief, maybe even satisfaction. But what I felt instead was sorrow, deep and wide, the kind that doesn't show up all at once but trickles in slowly, like water beneath a door. You're doing the right thing, Walter said gently. I know, I replied. Doesn't make it hurt less. As I stepped out into the parking lot, the sun was just starting to dip. I stood there a moment, letting the light hit my face. I felt older somehow, not just in years, but in weight. I went home and sat on the porch, Marjorie's blanket draped over my knees. The garden was blooming. The roses were fuller this year, like they knew something, like they were watching. That weekend I gathered everything, the old will, the new one, letters, voice recordings, even a photo of Grace sitting across from that lawyer at May's Diner. I put them all in the safe. I even told Pastor Ellis, a kind man, full of quiet wisdom, about the situation, just in case. I didn't give him details, but he knew enough. She was a good girl once, I said, voice cracking. She might still be, he answered, but even good people lose their way. Doesn't mean you have to hand them the map. That stayed with me. I began noticing how small things felt more important now. The way my porch creaked at dawn, the way the morning sun slanted across the kitchen tiles, the smell of Marjorie's soap. I still kept a bar in the linen closet. This house, it wasn't just wood and insulation. It was memory, love, legacy. I wasn't going to let anyone turn it into leverage. A few days later, I got a letter, Grace's handwriting. Inside, a formal request to review all documents related to the property, estate, and inheritance. Signed at the bottom by her and Ryan. No greeting, no dad, just cold legal language. I didn't respond. Instead, I took the letter to Walter and added it to the file. You want to counter this? He asked. No, I said. Let them wonder. Let them plan. I'll stay quiet for now. Because now I had something they didn't expect. Clarity. They thought they were playing chess, calculating every move, planning 10 steps ahead. But what they didn't realize was this. I'd already stepped off the board. They couldn't win a game I no longer played. What I was planning wasn't revenge. It was justice, quiet, patient, rooted in dignity. And I was ready. The envelope came by courier, thick, cream-colored, with embossed gold lettering. At first I thought it was another wedding detail, maybe a thank you note or a schedule, but as soon as I opened it, I knew. It wasn't an invitation, it was a warning. Mr. Weaver, due to unforeseen logistical constraints and security concerns, you are no longer invited to attend the wedding ceremony or reception of Grace Elizabeth Weaver and Ryan Carter Langford. It went on, cold, calculated legalese, signed at the bottom by Grace, Ryan, and their attorney. Security concerns? I sat at the kitchen table staring at the paper, my name on it, as if I were a threat, as if I were some stranger they needed to protect themselves from. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. I paid for the venue, funded the caterer, reserved the flowers. The deposit for the photographer came out of my checking account, and now they were uninviting me? From a wedding I built? In that moment, something inside me settled. Not in anger, not even in sadness, but in clarity. I got up and walked through the house, room to room, just like I had after Marjorie passed. I touched the door frames Grace once ran through barefoot, the floorboards I repaired late into the night while she slept upstairs, the shelf where her baby shoes still sat. And then I climbed up into the attic, took out the old cedar chest. Inside was everything. Grace's baby blanket, Marjorie's wedding ring, letters from college, photos from every birthday. I sat on the attic floor, cross-legged like an old man pretending he wasn't stiff, and looked at the past. You're not invited. They could say it on paper. They could stamp it, notarize it, seal it with gold. But they couldn't make it true, because they'd forgotten something. I wasn't just her father. I was the foundation of everything they stood on, every credit card limit they used, every piece of silverware at that reception, every rose petal tossed along the aisle. It was all built on my back, and I had every receipt. So I packed a folder, neat, organized, will, deed, wedding payment confirmations, property rights, and a formal cease and desist notice I had Walter draft, not for show, for truth. The next morning I stopped by the police station, not because I planned to make a scene, but because I knew how this town worked, better to be prepared. I spoke with Officer Grant, a good man, a few years younger than Grace, used to mow my lawn as a teenager. He listened quietly as I explained the situation. I handed him a copy of the documents, just in case. "Sir, are you planning to crash the wedding?" he asked gently. I smiled. "No, but I plan to walk onto land I own, stand inside a venue I paid for, and speak one truth." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Just stay calm, Mr. Weaver. You don't need to prove anything." "I already did," I said. At home, I pressed my suit, the one Marjorie bought me for church socials. Dark blue, subtle pinstripe, not flashy, just respectful. I polished my shoes, combed my hair, and shaved for the first time in weeks. It wasn't for them. It was for her. For the memory of who Grace used to be. And for Marjorie, because I knew she'd be watching. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my reflection. I looked tired, but I didn't look weak. I checked the folder one last time. Letters, signatures, evidence, everything in order. As I zipped it up, I whispered to no one, "I'm not going to make a scene, I'm going to make a point." Outside, the sun was rising, and I was ready. I arrived just after the guests were seated. The valet at the gate recognized me. Eyes widened like he'd seen a ghost. I rolled down the window and gave him a nod. "Mr. Weaver, sir, I was told—" "You were told wrong," I said calmly. "This property is still in my name. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to attend. For 5 minutes. Then I'll leave." He didn't know what to do. Poor kid looked like he wanted to melt into his vest. From the passenger seat, Officer Grant stepped out slowly. He adjusted his belt and gave the valet a polite nod. "It's okay, son," he said. "We're just here to make sure everything stays peaceful." The valet stepped aside. The venue was as grand as they'd promised. White tents, chandeliers strung from trees, guests in suits and gowns sipping champagne. A small string quartet played a soft melody, some romantic piece I didn't recognize. It should have been beautiful, but all I saw was a performance. I walked in, each step steady, deliberate. Officer Grant a few paces behind me. I carried the folder under my arm, plain, gray, unassuming, but weighty. The murmurs started before I reached the front. Heads turned, eyes followed. A few guests I recognized, churchgoers, old neighbors, shifted uncomfortably. Others whispered, and then she saw me, Grace, standing at the altar, veil pinned just right, bouquet trembling in her hands. Our eyes met. Hers widened. Fear? Anger? Maybe both. Ryan looked back, then whispered something to the officiant. A signal, maybe. The music didn't stop, but the moment did. I didn't approach the altar. I didn't shout. I walked over to the event coordinator near the seating area. She was flustered, fiddling with a headset. "Sir, I'm sorry. You can't—" I handed her a copy of the venue contract. "Page 3, under Property Owner Access, you'll find my name and proof of payment." She hesitated, flipped through. I turned to the crowd, calm, not theatrical, just enough for people to hear. "My name is Thomas Weaver. I built the house behind these trees with my wife, Marjorie. I paid for this wedding. Every chair, every flower, every shrimp on that tray. And a week ago, my daughter sent me a legal letter saying I wasn't welcome." Gasps, murmurs. Ryan stepped forward. "This isn't the time, Mr. Weaver." "On the contrary," I said. "This is the only time." I opened the folder, held up a copy of my will, the revised one. "This property is not part of your future. My estate does not belong to your marriage, and any attempt to manipulate or discredit me again will be treated legally, not emotionally." Grace stood frozen. Tears welled, but she didn't speak. Ryan turned to Officer Grant. "Are you going to let him do this?" Grant shrugged. "He hasn't broken a single law." Someone in the crowd clapped. Just once, then stopped. But it was enough. I looked directly at Grace. "I loved you more than I loved myself. I gave everything so you could have everything. But what I never gave you was permission to forget where you came from." Her lips quivered, and for a second, I thought she'd run to me. Say something. Apologize. Anything. But she didn't. Ryan whispered something and she nodded slowly. No expression. I turned to leave. But before I did, I set the small envelope with Marjorie's letter on the nearest table, the one holding the guest book. Then I walked away. Not a word more. Outside, Grant exhaled. "You sure know how to make a statement." I smiled faintly. Didn't make a statement. Just told the truth. Back in the car, I looked at the trees as we drove away. The same trees Grace used to climb. The same ones Marjorie used to hang wind chimes on. The same ones now holding fairy lights for strangers. I didn't stay for the vows. Didn't need to. What I came to say was said. And everyone heard it. Do you think the father made the right choice? Comment and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories. The morning after the wedding, my house was quiet. No phone calls, no messages, not even a knock at the door. The air was still, the kind of stillness that settles in after a storm. Not peace, exactly. Just absence. I made coffee the way I always did. 2 scoops, slow boil, mug warmed first. Same routine I'd had since the early days with Marjorie. She used to hum while the kettle hissed. Grace would bounce in the kitchen on school mornings asking if her hair looked like a storybook princess. Now the kitchen was just me, the ticking of the wall clock, and a silence that no appliance could fill. I stepped onto the porch and sat with my cup, blanket across my knees. From where I sat, I could see the rooftops of the wedding venue just beyond the trees. The party would be over by now. Guests gone, champagne flutes tossed in trash bags. Maybe Grace and Ryan were on a plane, or sulking in a hotel suite, trying to spin the story. But the truth was out, and truth, once spoken in front of witnesses, doesn't go back into hiding. I stayed outside until the sun burned off the fog. The garden was in full bloom, roses blushing red, Marjorie's favorite irises leaning heavy with color. She would have been proud, maybe not of the confrontation, but of the dignity in it. The way I didn't shout, the way I didn't beg, just facts, just honesty. That afternoon, I walked through town to pick up some supplies. As I passed the post office, two older women stepped aside quickly, whispering. A man at the gas station gave me a long look, not angry, just curious. At the hardware store, George, the owner, patted my shoulder as I paid for some nails. "Hell of a thing you did," he said. "Didn't do anything." He smirked. Exactly. The next few days followed a pattern. Some people nodded as I passed. Others avoided my eyes. And a few stopped me outright to offer quiet support. But I didn't need their approval. What I needed was space. I spent more time in the garden, pruned the hedges, fixed the squeaky gate, found myself doing small repairs I'd put off for years, not out of obligation but because the house deserved care. One afternoon, while cleaning the shed, I found a box of Marjorie's old things, scarves, dried flowers, a few recipe cards, and a note. Just a scrap, really, barely legible. If love doesn't protect what matters, it isn't really love. I sat on the workbench and let that line roll over me again and again. The next day, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Benji, a boy from church, maybe 14, awkward, polite. "Hi, Mr. Weaver," he said. "My mom said you might need help with anything. I mow lawns." I stared at him a second, then nodded. "Sure. The back's got some weeds." He lit up. "Cool. I'll grab my stuff." That evening, I paid him double what he asked. He smiled, sheepish. "Thanks. You didn't have to." "I know," I said, "but I wanted to." He left with a wave, and I watched him pedal away. That night, I sat with a journal and wrote everything I could remember. Not about the wedding, but about Grace, the good years, her first tooth, her soccer games, the way she cried when she broke her arm and wouldn't let go of my hand for hours. I needed to remember that version of her. The one untouched by entitlement, unclouded by ambition. I wasn't trying to erase what happened, but I also refused to let it be the last word. A week passed, then another, and then, one Sunday after church, Pastor Ellis stopped me. "Got someone asking about you," he said. "A woman from the nonprofit you mentioned. Said she got your letter and wants to meet." I raised an eyebrow. "Already?" He nodded. "Seems she's interested in your offer, turning the house into something more." I didn't respond right away, just looked out at the gravel lot, the trees swaying slow in the breeze. Finally I said, "Maybe it's time." He smiled gently. "Might be." As I walked home, I felt something strange. Not joy, exactly. Not relief, but movement. Like my life, frozen in place for so long, had finally begun to thaw. Grace hadn't called, and maybe she wouldn't, but for the first time since all this began, I wasn't waiting on her. I had other things to build. The woman's name was Lillian. She wore her gray hair in a low bun and carried a canvas satchel filled with folders and a thermos that smelled faintly of cinnamon tea. She introduced herself with a firm handshake, the kind you don't get much anymore, the kind that says, "I show up when I say I will." She'd driven from the city after receiving my letter. Said she didn't believe half the stories she'd heard about what happened at the wedding, but she admired how it had shaken the right trees. We sat on the porch, the same porch where I once read bedtime stories to Grace during power outages. Lillian opened her bag and pulled out a few papers, some designs, sketches, budgets. We run a transitional mentorship program for young adults aging out of the foster system, she explained. We've had trouble finding safe, stable housing in this county. Your home, this land, it's a sanctuary waiting to happen. I said nothing for a while. I just watched the wind stir the chimes that Marjorie hung 20 years ago. I'm not ready to move out, I said eventually. I'm not dead yet. Lillian chuckled. Good. We weren't asking you to. That surprised me. She leaned forward. What if this house didn't just become a home for others after you were gone, but while you were still living? I raised an eyebrow. You'd stay in your space, your rooms, your garden, your routine. But we'd adapt the other wing. A few rooms, communal dinners, shared tools. You'd be the landlord, mentor, grandfather figure, whatever you choose to be. It sounded impossible, but also, strangely, right. The next day, I pulled out the floor plans Marjorie and I had sketched back when we first built the place, back when Grace was still crawling around the living room chasing her own shadow. I traced the hallways with my finger, the way light fell through the windows, the forgotten storage room that could become a library, the den that hadn't been touched in years. I began to see it, not just as my house anymore, but as a house that could breathe again. That week I called up a few old friends, men who'd built their lives on lumber and sweat. We started small, cleaned out the back rooms, repaired the plumbing in the guest bath, replaced broken steps on the rear porch. Benji, the kid who mowed my lawn, came by after school to help carry wood. He brought a friend the second day. By the third, they'd invited 2 more. They called it the Weaver Project. I didn't argue. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the oak trees, I stood at the edge of the property with Lillian and watched the boys laughing as they carried plywood and paint cans like it was summer camp. This is what healing looks like, she said softly. I didn't respond, but I felt it. Inside, I moved old furniture out of the rooms that hadn't been used in years. I pulled Marjorie's favorite quilt from storage and laid it on the couch by the window. I opened the piano, untouched since Grace left, and played a single crooked note. I didn't know what song I was playing, but it didn't matter. Something had shifted. One morning, as I sipped coffee on the porch, a woman approached the gate, early 20s, arms crossed tightly over her chest, eyes wary. I'm looking for Miss Lillian, she said. I stood up. She's inside. You can come in. She hesitated, then stepped forward. She introduced herself as Alina, quiet, kept looking down, said she was referred from another shelter. Lillian invited her to stay a week while they found her a more permanent option. That night, I overheard Alina crying in the room down the hall. I didn't knock, just left a cup of tea and a note outside her door. The next morning, the cup was empty and the note was gone, and at breakfast she sat at the table. Didn't say much, but she sat. Lillian looked at me and smiled, like we both knew something had just started, something bigger than either of us. The house buzzed differently now, not chaotic, just alive. There were moments, of course, when I caught myself glancing at the door, half expecting Grace to walk in, to see what had become of the home she once loved. But she didn't come. Not yet. Still, I'd left her photo up in the hallway, the one where she's 5, missing a tooth, arms thrown around my neck. I left Marjorie's letters in the drawer where they'd always been. I didn't erase the past. I just made room for something else, for someone else. The next week we painted the front door a new shade of blue, rich and deep, the color of early morning skies. The kids voted on it. I let them. And when they asked what we should call this place, I answered without hesitation. Marjorie's house. By the end of the month, the house didn't sound like it used to. It echoed differently. There were voices now, low conversations drifting from the kitchen, the occasional burst of laughter from the garden, footsteps padding down the hallway at odd hours. The kind of noise that once would have bothered me. Now it felt like music. Benji stopped by every day after school, even when there wasn't any work. He'd sit on the back steps, sipping orange soda and quizzing me on woodworking techniques like he was prepping for a test that didn't exist. Alina had started baking, quietly. At first, she didn't even tell anyone, just left trays of muffins or cookies cooling on the counter. No note, no name. But one night, I walked into the kitchen and caught her smiling as she stirred batter, humming along to the old radio. "You always bake at midnight?" I asked. She didn't look up, just shrugged. "It's when I think best." That became her rhythm, baking when the world was asleep, and eventually others joined her. One evening there were 5 kids around the table, not loud, not wild, just present, sharing space, and they started calling me things. Not Mr. Weaver, just Pops, or G, or from one soft-spoken girl named Elsie, simply Thomas, with a kind of reverence like it was a title. They asked about the photos on the walls, the woman in the floral apron holding a pie, the little girl in the swing, the man in the uniform standing proudly in front of a house still under construction. "That's Marjorie," I told them. "My wife, the heart of this place." They always went quiet when I said her name, like they knew, like they respected it. And Grace? Grace remained a shadow. I hadn't heard from her since the wedding. But the silence didn't ache the way it used to, not with the house alive again. One rainy afternoon, I was cleaning out the hall closet when I found something wedged behind the shelf, an old VHS tape labeled Summer '97. I dug out the old player, patched the cables together, and gathered the kids that evening. The screen flickered to life, grainy and warm. There she was, Grace, 6 years old, running barefoot through the sprinklers in the front yard, her hair plastered to her cheeks, shrieking with joy. Marjorie's voice behind the camera, laughing. My voice, off-screen. "You'll catch cold," followed by her tiny, defiant yell. "I'm not afraid." The room went silent. Benji sat forward. "That's your daughter?" he asked. I nodded. "Dang," he whispered. "She looked like she had the whole world." "She did," I said. "She just didn't know what to do with it." The tape ended. Static filled the room. No one spoke for a long while. Later that night, I found a folded note outside my bedroom door. "Thanks for letting us see her. And you. E." That's when it clicked. These kids, these beautiful, bruised, brave young souls, they weren't just boarders. They were the family I didn't know I needed. Not by blood, not by duty, but by choice. They showed up. They stayed. They listened. Grace had once told me blood was thicker than water. But what she forgot was the second half of the saying, the full, older version. The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. It's not biology that binds us. It's loyalty. It's care. It's the decision to love even when you don't have to. One evening, as the sun painted the walls gold, I stood on the porch watching Elsie help Alina plant herbs by the fence. Benji was hammering a birdhouse together. 2 of the others were painting a mural in the hallway, a big tree with names carved into it. One of the branches had Marjorie written on it in soft green paint. Another had mine, and below that, slowly forming, were the others. "Thomas," Elsie called out. I turned. "You want to add yours?" I looked down at the brush she was holding out, then stepped inside, and wrote it there, right below the branch that once held everything. Family. It was nearly dusk when I saw her car slow in front of the house. At first, I wasn't sure it was her. The silver sedan looked like every other in town, but something about the hesitation, the way it lingered by the mailbox, told me it was Grace. I didn't get up from the porch, just sipped my tea and watched the sun melt into the trees. The car crept forward, then stopped. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the door opened. She stepped out slowly, alone. No Ryan, no suitcase. Just her, hair pulled back, face bare, wearing jeans and a soft blue sweater that looked too familiar. She looked older, tired, but not weak. She didn't say anything as she walked up the path. Her eyes scanned the house, pausing on the fresh coat of paint, the flowers lining the steps, the faint sound of laughter drifting from the back porch where the kids were still cleaning up dinner. "You've made changes," she said softly. I nodded. "It's not the same house you left." She folded her arms. "I wasn't sure you'd let me in. I didn't lock the gate." That hung between us for a moment. She stepped onto the porch, sat on the far bench, not beside me, but not distant either, just cautious. "I'm not here to fight," she said. "Good," I said. "I'm tired of fighting." She looked down at her hands. "I saw the letter, the new will. I got a copy." I figured. "I didn't come to contest it," she added quickly. "I came to understand it." That made me pause. She looked up, and for the first time in months, maybe years, her eyes weren't guarded. "They told me it was the smart thing," she said, "to consolidate, to plan, to secure our future, and I let them talk for me." "You stopped talking for yourself a long time ago," I said, not unkindly. She winced. There was a long silence. "You know," she said finally, "I remember the day we planted the apple tree. I was 4. You said if we took care of it, it'd outlive us both." "It still might," I said. "Hasn't missed a bloom yet." She smiled faintly, then looked away. "After the wedding," she said, "I thought I'd feel triumphant, grown up, in control, but all I felt was hollow." She wiped a tear quickly. "I opened the box you left on the guest table, the one with Mom's letter. I never thought I'd see her handwriting again." I said nothing. She reached into her purse and pulled out something small, the locket, the one I'd given her at the rehearsal dinner. "I wear it now," she said. "Not for fashion, for memory." She didn't apologize, not directly, but sometimes the hardest truths aren't spoken, they're sat in. "You've changed too," she said. "I had to," I replied. She looked toward the garden. "Who are they?" "Family," I said simply. That hit her harder than anything I could have shouted. She closed her eyes for a moment. "I deserve that." "You deserve the truth." She nodded. After a while, she stood, brushed off her jeans. "I don't expect anything," she said. "Not a reversal, not forgiveness. Just, maybe, someday, a seat at the table." I looked at her. For the first time in a long while, I saw not a threat, not a scheme, but my daughter, bruised by her own decisions, trying to find her way back to the porch she used to nap on. "I can't promise anything," I said, "but the gate's still unlocked." She stepped off the porch, stopped halfway down the path, turned back. "Tell them, the kids, I'm sorry for how I made you feel. Before all of this." "They know," I said. "They feel it too." She gave a small nod, then walked to her car and drove off. Slower this time, not running, just leaving. I stayed on the porch a while longer. The house behind me hummed with dishes clinking, someone playing a guitar out of tune, soft footsteps above, and I realized something. This was Grace, not the daughter. The moment. The choice to carry pain without poisoning what came next. Should he have forgiven his daughter? Share your thoughts in the comments. The ribbon was yellow, Marjorie's favorite color. Lillian said we should do something official, something real, to mark the start of the new chapter. Not a grand affair, just a gathering, a ceremony, a new beginning. We invited the town. Not everyone came. Some still whispered behind hands when I walked into the grocery store. But many did, more than I expected. Neighbors, old friends, a few church folks, and every young soul now living under this roof. We didn't rent a sound system or hire a band. We set up folding chairs on the lawn and hung hand-painted signs from the porch. Marjorie's house, a home for healing. I wore a suit, not the wedding one, just a clean button-up and a tie Marjorie once gave me, light blue with little sailboats. She said it made me look less serious. Benji gave the opening remarks, nervous as anything, stammering through his note cards, but proud. He told the crowd what the house had become, a place with hot meals and soft beds, a place where kids didn't have to explain their scars, a place where silence wasn't feared. Elsie read a poem she'd written about roots and branches and old men who carry more wisdom than they let on. Then Lillian spoke. And finally, they asked me to say a few words. I stood on the porch, same spot where I'd once held Grace as a baby, where I'd watched storms roll in with Marjorie by my side. I looked out at the crowd, at the rows of faces, some young, some older, some uncertain, and I said, this house was built with love, not perfect love, just real love, the kind that gets its hands dirty, the kind that endures. I paused. For a long time I thought this home was meant for one family, mine. But sometimes life teaches you that family isn't only blood. Sometimes it's who shows up, who stays, who sees you, not as an obstacle, but as a beginning. There was a stillness then, a good one. And then we cut the ribbon, laughter, clapping, the smell of fresh bread from the kitchen. Kids running around the garden Marjorie once tended, paint smudges on the porch railing from the mural that now covered half the wall, a big oak tree with names scrawled like carvings. I found Grace's name added at the base. I didn't ask who did it. Later, as the sun dipped low, I walked through the house one more time. The living room glowed with warm light, pillows scattered, the radio playing something slow and hopeful. In the old dining room, I found a group playing cards. They waved me in, offered me a seat. Maybe in a minute, I said, just soaking it in. Outside, wind chimes danced gently. I walked to the backyard. The roses were in bloom. I stood by Marjorie's marker, just a small stone tucked beneath her favorite bush. No need for anything grand. She wouldn't have liked that. I did what we promised, I whispered. I protected Grace, in the only way I knew how. A breeze lifted the edge of my coat. I didn't expect to build a second family, I said, but they came, and they stayed, and they're good. You'd like them. I rested my hand on the stone. I miss you every day. As I turned to go, I saw them, the kids, setting lanterns on the porch steps. Homemade, out of jars and string. They flickered like fireflies in a jar. "Thomas," one of them called, "come see what we made." I smiled, walked back slowly, sat on the porch, and watched as the house, our house, glowed from within. Marjorie's house was no longer just mine, and in